Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming. My name's Julian Newby, and I'm talking to four very interesting people this morning. The subject of cult television. Or do we call it cult? Do we call it paranormal, sci-fi, fantasy? That's kind of what we're going to work out during this session. We've got four experts on the subject, and they're going to talk through the concept of this kind of programming, who watches it, why it's become mainstream, popular worldwide, and they're also going to talk about some of their own projects, or at least their most recent projects. And we're going to start with a gentleman from BBC Worldwide, executive producer of international drama, Mr. Ben Donald, who's here particularly to talk about the new series Refugees. So give a warm welcome to Ben Donald. Have a seat, Ben.
Thanks.
And before we chat, let's have a look at this, or some of this show. Set the program up for us a bit. Give us a bit more about it.
I'm going to reveal the plot.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Refugees the premise is we examine the effects on a family and a small isolated community when globally billions and locally thousands of refugees turn up with this extraordinary story that they are from the future, but we remain very much in the environment of that family and small community where we can only subsist of fragmented information and rumor and myth about what's going on, what's happening in the cities, what's happening, and how the governments are lying to us. So we haven't gone kind of global with a story investigating much about the future. We use that as a premise to see how then this event acts as a sort of poison drop to bring out secrets and hidden stories in our protagonists, and we watch how a community reacts and the different responses that ultimately risk tearing it apart, and would be that the relationships and the community itself. So it has this fantastical premise, but we are very quickly in the world of grounded sci-fi, or if some sci-fi is out there, this is kind of more near-fi, it is as much about a taut psychological thriller, stroke mystery. I like to think of it as aspects of a Western sometimes. So we had many references when we were doing the show, which were with Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs or Claude Chabrol, The Butcher. It's not traditional monsters and aliens and high concept sci-fi. It's much more. What would you do? What's your response as an audience member if a stranger comes knocking on the door with this extraordinary story?
Before we broaden out, I'd like to go to specifics. Can you tell us what the red lights are? Or is that a...
No, I can't, because that would be spoiling it, wouldn't it?
You're watching that and you think, oh my God, what is that?
Yeah, that is obviously a gadgety sci-fi element that's there, and it is it's a tracking mechanism apart from anything else. And mysteriously, some people are taken off the streets, and it forces know what these guys are up to. And that is as much part of the mystery to the family that we see this through. As they try and figure out why innocent members of their community are being taken away because of some contact and something they've said with these refugees. So
how did you come to this project? How did it?
The story of this project is something which I think I and BBC Worldwide are particularly proud of, because there are many things about it which are a first. It is as you see made by a fantastic Spanish production company called Bamboo Producciones. It's the first time that BBC Worldwide as a distributor, not as a production company, so distinct from what we do out of LA, and you'll talk about Intruders later. First time BBC Worldwide as a distributor acts as an initiator, as a project, as a kind of co-commissioner. And the story goes back 18 months to a meeting I had here with a great guy from Antena 3, who's in the audience, and I'm not going to embarrass him by naming it, but it was one of those meetings where they wanted to do an original drama for La Sexta. We're always looking for interesting ways to augment our catalogue and not just subsist off the traditional business models of getting great shows through from British producers. And we were also admirers of a certain type of drama. And we realized in the meeting room there was an opportunity that we could have walked out and done nothing about. He introduced me to Bamboo. I met and I saw their show reel. I read several scripts of shows that they had in development. They then came and pitched us 3 shows. We liked the concept of this one. We worked together on I think, an initial script and outline. And then, we greenlit it in January on the basis that we would, there were certain criteria we needed. But essentially, we were 50-50 partners with a Spanish production company and a Spanish broadcaster. It's the first time the BBC Worldwide has ever done that as well. And we have a very, very specific lens through which we need to view all our drama sort of acquisitions. That it needs to be a show that can sit alongside the best of British drama. And then we've got a fantastic cast in there with David Leon, Natalia Taylor, and Will Keane as our 3 leads. And I think it's every bit as good as some of the other stuff we're down here launching that's come from the British production sector. And yet it's kind of British enough for us, but it's made by this fantastic creative Spanish team. And the decision-making all along in partnership with the producers and with the network has been one of the most collaborative co-productions that I've been involved in. I've done a few.
Well, it's nice to hear that the birth of this show was here at MIPCOM.
Yeah. Well done, Reed.
Yeah, exactly. Well done, you guys. You actually used the word sci-fi earlier.
Yeah.
Is this sci-fi?
Well, I think the great thing about sci-fi, like some of the other great genres like crime, is that it's become so now full of subsets. So in crime you have relationship crime, soft crime, psychological crime. It's ensemble pieces, female-led, whatever. Here, what interested me, because I'm not one of the world's kind of sci-fi geeks, but we are acutely aware at BBC Worldwide that this is a genre that sells increasingly well around the world, and that some of the niche digital channels are growing their audiences. It's serialized, also in shape, so that appeals to the trend, whether that is actually a traditional broadcaster or an SVOD platform that it might play on. But I think what I hope comes through in what I described a couple of minutes ago is the fact that sci-fi done at its best, what interests me is that it can hold up a mirror to the world and act as it's a fantastic metaphor. And if District 9 is a reference, that was had some comic elements, but the kind of the mutants in that are a ghettoized community on the outskirts of Pretoria or Joburg. Here, our refugees stand for the immigration debate. This isn't a soapbox show that talks, is didactic and wears its issues on its sleeves, but it is about our response to the other. And boy, there's a fair amount of that in our society at the moment. We have the immigration debate in just about every single country. I think we're living at a time where there are more displaced human beings now than at any time since the Second World War. You have to look at Syria and Iraq and many other countries, Ukraine and stuff. It feels incredibly relevant, and yet we've managed to make a entertaining, scary, psychological thriller. But I suppose in the layers of it, if you peel it back and you then came to study it, I'd hope that you'd find that kind of extra, something extra for the viewer other than just kind of great characters and great plot.
It is the key that it has to be grounded in a understandable story and something that people can relate to. And one of the first things you said about the thing about refugees was that it's about a family or families. So people need to be able to recognize ordinary human situations before they can accept the paranormal or the fiction of the science.
Yeah, I don't think that's always true. Clearly, there are shows that where you can identify with things that are more overtly non-human, but I think they have to have human characteristics. That's the thing, is to play out. Whether you're talking about the Greek myths or any kind of new set of mythology. The very best of those characters carry the whole gamut of human traits. Here we've chosen to go with a family that could just as easily be, is a very real kind of existing kind of human family rather than a kind of mythological one.
On the creative side, though, you must have to be very careful with this kind of programming. You don't just show silly stuff.
No. You need to make sure the rules of your universe are absolutely watertight so that you don't have audiences feeling distanced by, well, I don't really get that, or I don't buy it, or hang on, that logic doesn't work with that piece of logic. It's incredibly hard to get that all right. And to some extent, you have to believe that your strength of your characterization and the strength of your plot will actually take people in where it's, because you can't spend so much time in exposition explaining it all. You've got to have confidence that people will pick things up and get comfortable with rules and logic and be carried into the characters' stories. But you're right, yeah, I mean, you can't be, that's one of the first things you have to get right, rules of the universe.
Rules and logic. We all know that scientifically it's impossible to travel back or forward in time.
Yeah.
So let's hear how Stephen Moffat, executive producer of Doctor Who, gets that kind of thing on the screen and allows us to believe it. Stephen Moffat, welcome. Hi, Stephen. Hi. And before that, let's take a look at the Doctor, because it's a new one. Fantastic. I mean, I should say also that you're executive producer of Sherlock as well, so you have 2 huge hits on your hands. But can we just clear it up? It is impossible in real life to travel backwards or forwards in time.
Well, you can definitely travel forwards in time, and you're doing it right now, just quite slowly. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made it here since the morning, would you? But backwards does seem to be a logistical problem. So far, we can't travel in time, but it says they can in Doctor Who, and Doctor Who is never wrong.
Okay, all right. You put me right on a couple of issues there. Can you explain the recent phenomenal success of Doctor Who? I mean, we know it's been going for 50 years. Yeah. I suppose it was a domestic show 50 years ago. It started out on the BBC, and all British children talked about it and asked their parents if they could watch it. In the last 10 or even fewer years, it's gone fully global. What's the development there? How has that happened?
Well, I think largely we on Worldwide has started to try to sell it. That's the major difference. I mean, television was all domestic for a very long time, wasn't it? So, the old series did sell around the world. In fact, you can find, episodes of William Hartnell's Doctor Who dubbed into Turkish. It did happen. But I suppose there's been a real push to sell it abroad of late. And I think, I would argue, it's the kind of show that can go anywhere. Yeah. Because it is, it's not actually, I mean, we make it in Cardiff, but it is set all around time and space. It's not culturally specific to Britain in any important way, though in incidental details, of course, it is.
The storylines are preposterous. Would you say
everyone's a critic? It's all true. I think. Well,
so how do they work?
They're extravagant. Well, they work in 2 ways. Obviously, we go hell for leather on the sci-fi fantasy aspect of Doctor Who, because the main character lives in a telephone box that's bigger on the inside and travels in time and can change his face whenever he's ill or the actor asks for a pay rise. He can do that. Those are big, fantastical elements. So the show has to match up to that. You can't introduce a character like that and then just have him teach in a school. It wouldn't really work, would it? Yeah. But the reason it works, I think, is while it is fantastical and absurd and preposterous and mad, emotionally, it's quite grounded. It's quite an emotional show. So while you're telling the story of a terrible invasion, it is frequently the intimate moments in Doctor Who that make it connect with his audience. It does that unusual thing. I suppose it's increasingly usual of being sci-fi that people who don't like sci-fi watch. Even though, I mean, we never make any of them. Some shows do, but we never make any apology about Doctor Who being as science fiction as it gets. We don't like to have a scene without a robot or a talking slug coming on. It is full on that way. But emotionally, we try and keep it grounded and serious and proper and funny.
The other thing that is preposterous, if you can use that word, if that's the right word, is that you change the Doctor every few years. I mean, if you did that in, I don't know,
James Bond.
James Bond.
Sherlock Holmes.
Catching me out all the time. I mean, come on. If you do, when that happens, there are famous cases. I don't know, going back years. Darren in Bewitched. If someone replaced Mick Jagger in the Rolling Stones, been going for about the same time, it wouldn't work. How does that work?
Well, it's not just the thing that Doctor Who survived, recasting the lead. It's the thing that defined and made Doctor Who sort of immortal. It's the best example of a recast ever.
Yeah.
Because you not only do you change the lead, but you're not just looking for a lead who can sort of play the same sort of part. Each Doctor is quite different. We actually say that the Doctor's personality rearranges itself, and he's sometimes a very different man at the end of it. Yeah. That means that Doctor Who can be a star vehicle, and yet counterintuitively be a star vehicle for now 12 different actors, because you can maximize each successive Doctor for what the new star brings to it. It's a brand new show every few years, because you don't just recast the lead, you change the lead character.
Ben, you talked about refugees as being politically and socially significant, raising the issue of immigration and so on. You called it sci-fi, we may call it something else. What's the fundamental difference between refugees type sci-fi or paranormal and Doctor Who type?
Well, there's a very clear visual difference, I think.
Yeah.
You asked about the red. There are really very, very few visual effects in refugees. And we don't go into outer space, and we don't have flying objects and explosions and the train set that Stephen and Doctor Who have. So I suppose it's, and the reason we don't have that is because we were focused on our isolated family and community, and it isn't about any kind of extraterrestrial or kind of visual effecty kind of thing. It's much more about those. And I think that people are, I totally agree with Stephen that the emotions are probably the same and therefore remain relatable, but they can be carried through different avatars, and they can be slugs or as we've got, more recognizable human beings. Yeah. So they join emotionally, but they are represented by, in our case, more recognizable human beings.
And I mentioned Sherlock earlier. That's a story that you have taken into this zone in a way. What was the decision-making process behind that? How did you feel confident, given that there are about 100 Sherlock Holmes societies around the world who could have been up in arms and...
They very rarely take to the streets with weaponry, Sherlock Holmes fans. No, it's fine. There wasn't any sort of glacial, clever decision about it. It's just that Mark Gatiss and myself are huge Sherlock Holmes fans.
Yep.
And we've always wanted to do our own version of Sherlock Holmes. It comes from the same place that Doctor Who's Resurrection came from. Absolute enthusiasm for the source material. You don't embark in these things thinking they're going to be huge hits. You just hope somebody gives you money in order to have some fun. Basically, Mark and I did it so we could get photographed next to the 221B door. That's the entire reason for doing Sherlock in the first place. We thought we had a different angle on it that would work. Not even a new angle. We were just discussing once that of all the old versions of Sherlock Holmes, among our favourites were the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce updated ones, where he fights Nazis quite heretically. And we just thought, actually updating Sherlock Holmes, as we automatically update James Bond but never think about it, is the right thing to do. Making him Victorian leaves him in a sepia-tinted photograph. It makes it grand and important, whereas Sherlock Holmes is meant to be pulpy and new and vital. You should think that if you just found the right house on Baker Street, you could go and meet him. The original readers of the Strand magazine would think that about Sherlock Holmes, that he lived now as a modern, dangerous young man. Gradually, he became a sort of ancient creature, usually played by a 50-year-old who was unobtainable and aloof. Now you can actually see what he is. He's a scary young posh bloke who can solve crimes.
Were you ever nervous about recreating it and bringing this new element to the viewer, to the fan, to the reader?
No, not nervous in that sense, not really. I mean, you get nervous when you go to the dentist, that's appropriate, but I mean, getting the opportunity to make Sherlock Holmes was just incredibly exciting. There was a moment when my new version of Doctor Who was about to come out in the same few months as Sherlock Holmes was about to come out, and I was thinking, if I screw both these up, all I have to do is shoot Daniel Craig in the face, and I've screwed British culture. But aside from that, really, it's just my feeling about both those shows is that I think it is amazing on a daily basis. I think it is amazing that I get to work on them.
Yeah.
That was just an extraordinary thing I never expected. As I wake up every day and think, I'm the showrunner of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
And
I just watched it so much, I ended up making it. That's
remarkable that they are two massive hits as
Yeah.
well. Well, let's meet someone else who's steeped in this world, maybe again back into the darker side. Glen Morgan is executive producer and creator of Intruders. Welcome, Glen Morgan.
Shake your hand.
Glen, have a seat. Well, before we go on, let's have a look at Intruders. Could you set the program up a bit more for us?
First off, bonjour, and I want to thank MIPCOM and you guys and BBC Worldwide for you brought my wife and I here. It's an honor to be in France and visiting Europe, and on a panel with men that I really admire. My daughter's in Los Angeles texting me going, ask you about Sherlock season 4. I'm like, Intruders is based on a novel by Michael Marshall Smith. It's psychological, paranormal, conspiratorial thriller. We were very much influenced by the Alan Pakula movies in the 70s, The Parallax View, All the President's Men, Clute, Conversation is Coppola, but and there's 4 or 5, different stories, but the audience can tell that somehow they're all going to come together, and it leads to the revelation that there's a secret society, pardon me, out there for centuries that has learned to control reincarnation.
Now, you worked on the X-Files.
I did.
Which is possibly one of the first of these types of series that really did go mainstream, I would think. Maybe I don't know, maybe I've got that wrong, but I feel that took the paranormal, the strange, into the mainstream. How did that work? What was behind the success story there?
Well, I think that subject matter is the audiences have always wanted it. My experience when I started out at Stephen Cannell on 21 Jump Street, and shows were like cop shows and lawyer shows, in the United States. And, but Twilight Zone had been very successful, and Star Trek had been very successful, and even after Star Wars, there was still a hesitation. And if you look at it, X-Files had filled a hole that had been there since probably Night Gallery or the Twilight Zone. So the audience has always wanted it. You just had a generation of, I think, studio heads and people that greenlit projects that were just uncomfortable with the geek thing. They didn't believe that there was an audience for it. And now the guys that are pushing the buttons grew up on the X-Files and Doctor Who. So I think that's why, it's always been there. There was just some hesitation to make it.
The growing popularity of this genre, I think, maybe it's not a genre, maybe it's a group of maybe it's a group of types of programming, because the 3 things that we've seen so far, and we've also discussed Sherlock as well, are very, very different. But do you think there's a reason why now there is so much, these programs have so much success and so much popularity? Is there an element of escapism, or is it something else? Gentlemen, generally.
I think of course there is, and I think these guys mentioned before, genre or whatever, whether it's horror or science fiction, seems to always be a little ahead of the curve historically. Godzilla was talking about nuclear annihilation, before Strangelove did. I'd rather watch Strangelove, but, they were there before. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers talked about McCarthyism in the United States when no other drama would do it. And I think now that we see, I think it's interesting now that there's a lot of your show and Walking Dead, and there was Jericho and Revolution, that there's this are we not handling, the global situation, climate change well? And now, our show is about reincarnation, and there's resurrection at home, and then there's the Returned here in France that they're doing at A&E in the United States, and Forever on ABC. So I'm concerned that people are feeling like, well, we're not going to make it even through the apocalypse. Yeah. So I hope that we can return.
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's a way of dealing with these fears that people have about the future, about the present, about the world. This is kind of either stimulating it or calming them down.
Yeah, you can deal with it in a way that's not directly about you right now, the way that John Ford talked about post-World War II and The Searchers in a Western that took place 100 years before that did. So that's what and you're right, it's always about character anyway.
I think there's another thing, is that it's a modern televisual representation of a human desire that's kind of pretty old as well. That the more that science advances, the more kind of human condition kicks back to want to postulate about the unknowable. And we live in a very charted world, and communication and data and algorithms and stuff like that. And in the 19th century, it was ghosts and witchcraft, or before that, which kind of rebelled against the Enlightenment. And the great literature, proper science fiction, H.G. Wells and stuff, was always very kind of scientifically rooted about the kind of the complexity of the kind of universe out there. And I think it's just a human natural reaction when we've got it all figured out, just to kind of reckon that we haven't, and it's probably quite healthy.
And cinema, of course, has been doing this forever, and there have been huge hits throughout the history of cinema, in the paranormal genre, in the sci-fi genre. Television, until, I don't know, maybe 20-odd years ago, it was always considered a bit of a jokey, quirky thing. Right. It didn't quite handle it in the grand scale that cinema did. But now, I mean, this is part of the film and TV Crossroads strand of conferences here at MIPCOM. And people have been talking in many different ways about the breaking down the barriers between TV and cinema. And it seems that finally that's happened in this genre as well. These things look much more sensible than they did when it was the Twilight Zone, for example.
Well, it's technically possible now to make TV shows that look as good as movies. It is possible to do that. I mean, in fact, there's been fantasy television for it. I mean, both Doctor Who and Star Trek belong to the 60s. But with the best will in the world, you didn't have the technical resources to make them look the same as movies.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yes.
You can now.
With Doctor Who, we used to laugh at,
You may have laughed, I did not laugh.
I didn't see
and anyone who laughed was wrong.
You get so cross. But, hubcaps in space and all that
What's
kind
wrong
of
with
thing.
that?
It was...
How do you know spaceships don't look like hubcaps? Don't you think that's a great way to make hubcaps intrinsically more interesting?
But now, of course, we've got the reimagination of Thunderbirds, which was, it's a classic and huge, but everyone laughed at men on strings. Now we're going to see the men not on strings.
I think people are revisiting all those kind of comic heroes or the Marvel heroes because they weren't portrayed in a kind of psychologically deep way, or it didn't come across to me that way. And I think people have gone back and reinvented and retold the kind of prehistory of Batman, Spider-Man, and stuff like that, and they've kind of explored the dark side and the psychology. So that's also the human element is being recast in those, as well as the technological elements moving on kind of around them in terms of the on-screen production values.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that the human element, the stories, the personalities and relationships are crucial in the success of anything like this. And I always think back to the first Back to the Future, which everyone calls a sci-fi film. They traveled in time. But famously, the only sort of sci-fi element of that was a cranky old car.
It's really a comedy of errors.
Yeah. Everything else was proper human relationships. Sitting around the table, being late for school, being told off by teachers. That was it.
And in fairness, being erased from time. Which...
Yeah. Well, yes, minor detail. We all heard recently that David Lynch is about to bring Twin Peaks back to life. And that was one of these series that sort of set the mold in a period, I think it was 1990. Our next guest is a big fan of that man, and I think a lot of you are big fans of him. So let's introduce M. Night Shyamalan. Welcome.
Should I go around this? Nice to see you guys. Thank you. It was very interesting listening to all you guys.
Yeah. I think we call you Knight, do we
right
not?
there?
Yeah, take
Thank
that
you.
seat. And
How's that way?
before we carry on talking, let's have a look at Wayward Pines. Something we haven't really touched upon, there were elements in there of comedy. Comedy's quite important, I would think, in this genre. Was that something that just seeped into this, or was it an intention of yours to make this funny as well as hellishly scary?
Well, it was actually the humor that really drew me to it.
Yeah.
It's something I secretly want to do all the time, is make comedies. And you see the kind of, I think the references to David Lynch's stuff is because everybody's acting so odd when they ask, what happened to the body, and she's like, you want a piece of pie? You want more pie? And they keep on going about the pie, and then, Matt's so wonderful in his sarcasm and, eccentric performances. I enjoy that kind of dark humor, and I got to shoot the pilot and kind of set that, kind of the thing we're talking about, we're not going to talk about for a little bit, what's really at stake here.
Yeah, without spoiling,
Yeah.
can you kind of set it up for us?
Set up the show or the spoiler? I can't set up
No,
the
not the
spoiler.
spoiler.
Basically, the show's about a secret agent played by Matt Dillon, who is investigating the disappearance of two agents who went to this small town in Idaho, Wayward Pines, and disappeared. On the way there, he gets into an accident and wakes up in the hospital in Wayward Pines, and everyone is extremely nice and completely polite and very strange. And he keeps asking questions where they are, what happened to him, and they won't answer. They just keep offering pie. And he soon realizes he can't leave this town, and it becomes very dark very quickly.
I was on your set
Oh, really?
when we were shooting. We were both shot in Vancouver, so we would scout one location and they'd be there. Yeah.
What was the genesis of this? How did it start?
How did I get involved
Yeah.
in the TV? Well, for a while I've been trying to do, consider television. It's very scary what you guys do for me. Very, very scary. I mean, I've been doing, since I was a teenager, been making movies, I know how to do a 2-hour, I know how to do that, and, in my head I can time it. Like, for example, it becomes almost like a mathematical thing. So like Sixth Sense is 107 minutes, Unbreakable is 107 minutes, Signs is 107 minutes, and The Village is 107 minutes. It's like randomly because it's like a rhythm, that's what it feels like. The rhythm of storytelling feels correct to me at this point, like that. So this is completely new math for me. I don't, I was terrified. So I said no a lot. So any excuse to not do it I was looking, and this came as a pilot. And I read the pilot, at night. I was in bed and read it. And I closed it, and basically, a version of what you guys just saw. And I was like, as long as everyone isn't dead, I'm very interested in what this is. And so it was based on a science fiction book. So they told me what was actually going on, and I thought it was an incredibly powerful way to talk about culture and society and the things that are bothering us right now. I have, like, in my house, I have all these posters of my favorite movies. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is right next to the door to my theater, and I didn't obviously grow up at that time, but I feel the paranoia of,
I didn't either. I watched it later. But.
yeah, and it's I didn't mean you. I wasn't making an indictment about your age. I was just and I felt it's a wonderful way to talk about our anxieties. I do think that science fiction is that thing. And it was funny you were talking about it. It was interesting what you said, how in movies we've been doing it for a long time. And my instinct in general is to is to take a big subject and then reference it and don't really talk about it anymore, and then put, you know, people eating a meal in the context of, God, we're not talking about the thing that's outside, the alien invasion or the like this. Don't talk about it. It's way over there on the shelf, but that keeps it very powerful.
One of our innermost fears is there, not being able to get out, not being able to escape, being trapped, and it's the prisoner in a way. I mean, another paranormal series from, it must have been the late 60s, early 70s in the UK, which was, I'll come back to the word preposterous, but it had such a cult following because it was mad, and it was set in a false world, which actually does exist in Wales and so on. But are you all trying to do this, sort of find our innermost fears and put them up there on the screen and scare the hell out of us? Is that really what it is?
Well, monsters only work if they represent something you're already afraid of.
Yeah.
I mean, just an ordinary, I know that in Doctor Who, if it's just a big fanged beast, no kid will be frightened of it. But if you say it's an unknowable creature that lives under your bed or at the back of your bedroom cupboard, or the creaks in your house are because an alien's picked your house up or something, if you can monsterize things that really exist in people's real life, then they'll be frightened. Yeah. If you just throw them a great big dinosaur or something, they won't be. They'll be impressed at your CGI, but they won't be frightened by it.
Well, there seemed to be a visual reference, correct me if I'm wrong, in Intruders to The Exorcist, with the girl in bed becoming contorted. That is a horrible idea, isn't it? Bad things happening to innocent children. I mean, that's a recurring theme through so much of this stuff.
Well, that's another element of horror, is, you know, what gives you the creeps is something that's not either here nor there. Why everyone thinks that, you know, clowns are really creepy to people. It's not really a human, but you know it's supposed to amuse you, but it falls in the middle. So when you have a 9-year-old girl who, in our case, is acting like a 70-year-old serial killer, it's not here nor there, you know. And but there's a whole subgenre of The Others, The Omen, The Exorcist, to a lesser degree, Sixth Sense, of a child who's involved with this, you know. And I think it's, you know, that thing where it's not really a baby and it's not really an adult, you know. So.
Oh yeah, or Eraserhead. I mean,
right, of course.
Going back to your passion, David Lynch. What else informed your enthusiasm? I mean, what were you a fan of? What are you a fan of? What feeds into your work?
You know, I was just thinking, you know, ultimately what we're doing is some kind of psychological trick when we tell stories about creating the unknown in things that are known. I mean, fear is, you know, triggered when the unknown. So whether it's something mundane like, oh, I'm starting a new job in another city, it's unknown, I'm scared, right? Or relationship or anything. Or that door, there's a sound on the other side of the door, I'm triggering something unknown. And so if you can take something domestic and like, you know, you're in your office, you're working, you see the picture of your wife is face down on your desk, kind of, that's strange, and you put it back up again, and then you go to get coffee, you come back, the picture's face down again. Immediately a fear trigger happens to you, because now your domestic situation, which you understood the rules, have now become unknown to you. And like for me, I could write a movie on that. What now? What? Why? And that's really a fun thing to do with science fiction. I think it just, you know, what's wrong, what's going on, and you know, I was trying to think of some of the shows that really connected with me, and you've mentioned, Mike, all of the ones that I loved, you know? And I do think in movies we do reference it, like you mentioned, Back to the Future, and just keep it to the edges of the storytelling. Yeah. Again, the more you talk about it to some extent, the more we're undoing the fear factor as you talk about it. So my instinct is always, even when I was making this show, like I could do a first act, the entire movie a first act. That's my instinct, just to do the first act. And
you'd get notes on that.
Yeah, and I do. I always get notes. It's always because they basically they want a third act only and not a first act. And I love the kind of what's wrong, the photo down thing for the whole movie. So my instinct is that to try to do it in TV is even more challenging. My goodness, you know, with the, you know, potentially the commercial breaks and all the movements that have to happen, you know, 6 times in an episode. Fascinating.
Which brings me to what I wanted to hear from you, the transition from film to television. And is it will you go back the other way? What took you to this step? Why did you decide to treat this subject in a series format rather than a 90-minute movie?
Well, you know, for me, you know, because I write and direct, it takes 1.5 to 2 years to put, and longer if it's a CGI movie, but my normal thrillers take 1.5 years to 2 years, and that's a long time to wait to talk to your audience and to have a relationship. I would love to be able to tell more than, you know, 20 stories in my life or 30 stories in my life. And you know, Agatha Christie's my hero, so I wish you know, 80 stories I would love to tell, you know. And this got me, it taught me a lot, actually. You know, I'm super precious and probably in a very bad way with my thrillers. No one changes a word, every shot's designed. And that's positive up to a point, you know. And then when we were doing this, these guys, they move so fast. I mean, it's unreal how fast you guys move and how much material you guys have to master. In awe of what you guys do, seriously. And so it made me less precious on the set. So like, you know, I was directing Matt, and you know, I was just aiming at a color, because you know, normally I'd be like, you know, really prescriptive about everything that the actor did, and we would rehearse, and all of that stuff till it was like a play. That's basically how I direct my thrillers. And in this case, I had to be much more kind of aim for a color. You know, I need an emotional color from Matt or from Terrence, and it loosened me up. And then I shot a movie, which I'm editing now, but I shot a movie after this, and it really informed me. I did my prescriptive thing, and then I was able to step back a second, and I just said, all right, let's just go for this color, and I wasn't as precious, and there was wonderful edges that came out because of that normally weren't there, I think, in my, you know, you realize, I guess, you as a filmmaker, you get a lot of bad habits creep in, and you don't realize that your posture starts slouching, and you don't even realize you're slouching until someone forces you, you know. And this was what, for me, it was a great process. And then I got to hire all these wonderful directors for the series, and learn, wow, when you're telling the same story, but different directors are telling the same story, the leans, like I was heavily director driven on the series. And you know, like I was gonna make Life of Pi a long time ago when the book was first written, and I wrote, and the author came to my house, and I wrote out how I was gonna do it, and it was very dark and Hitchcockian thing. And then Ang made his version, which was this beautiful, like, poem, like spectacle. It really strikes me how we each would make the stories differently, and I find that fascinating. And when the directors came on, some were much more muscular than me, and as I said, you know, I'll sit here and do this scene forever with the conversation, and some were more sensual, some were more funny, some were, you know, and I loved the leans. And if I, you know, was gonna do this again, I would be interested in, you know, leaning on the directors to really even do a little bit more of that individualization. I know that goes against type.
Well, on that point, with this genre, paranormal, if we call it that, do you need more of a reality check than you do if it's normal as opposed to paranormal? And who is the person who is there more, are there more instances of people saying, no, that's too silly? I mean, maybe you're the guy with the overview who, you know, who works in normal and paranormal.
You mentioned the word silly a lot.
In the nicest possible way.
I don't know. Rules, they work. The characters, they work. The emotions are real. You know, and now with the effects, you can do things without having stupid kind of explosions that look a bit amateur. I mean, that was what let the genre down on TV for so long. But even so, it didn't let it down for lots and lots of people, because they found real meaning and engagement with the characters. And I'm sorry to come back to that all the time, but it's kind of, I think, really important.
Yeah.
Because silliness is, I mean, silliness as distinct from comedy One of the things I find quite scary about your show is the fact that there's also that fear, not just of sort of unknown and monsters, but you've got a kind of a duped society there that's a bit like a sort of a Fahrenheit 451. It's all kind of pie and everyone's smiley and stuff, and that's the sort of the opium, that's the sort of the sleepwalking thing that we could be in the middle of as well right now as a sort of obese capitalist society. And I think that I've gone slightly off question here, partly because I don't have an answer to your question. But
right. You didn't like me saying silly. I completely understand.
Silly. I think if you're a fan of the genre, if you're a fan of some of these long-standing films and shows, that would be a red rag to a bull, really, because I think that people have engaged with them, but we can just do it better now.
Yeah. Before we throw this open to the floor, which I'd like to do, when did this become cool? Because sci-fi had a geeky image. Now it's cool. It's dead cool. When did that happen, and how did it happen?
That's a fascinating question. When I did Unbreakable, right? I guess 2000. I remember distinctly the marketing conversations and everything. Well, we can't mention this as a comic book movie because that's just some geeks at some convention. There was no, literally it was like that was the problem with the movie, is that it was about comic books, which was so limiting at that time, and that was so fringe, and that group has no authority anywhere and doesn't have any economic power. Can you believe what's happened to everything since then? I mean, literally, I think with the internet, they were given the keys to the kingdom, and they used to be fringe, and now they're the doorkeepers of everything. And
but it was kind of coming. I would say it became popular with Star Wars. It became cool through the graphic novels like Frank Miller and the Watchmen and the V for Vendetta. It was cool, and my writing partner Jim Wong and I in 1990 went in NBC and said, "This is going to be like a graphic novel," and they'd say, "A what?" They'd go, "Well," they'd say, "You mean a comic book?" I'm like, "No, it's a graphic novel." They had no idea. Now it's a tyrant. If you go in to pitch, is this a graphic novel? Is it based on something else? You can't go in with an original idea. They want to hear it from something else. So, like, if you had that problem, I think in 5 years later, it wouldn't have been, because it was coming. Through the graphic novel. Yeah.
So geeky to popular to cool is the progress of this type of programming.
I think there's a sort of, sorry, just last thing, I think there's a sort of pattern that applies to lots of things. I mean, everyone loves brands are about belonging to communities, and it only takes so long for so many people to belong to a brand, and it goes on uncool again. Yeah. So I think it's kind of ironic that we're talking about cult to mainstream. Maybe there's another flip to come, because I think people like to feel that they're the only people who have seen Wayward Pines, the only people who kind of have the inside track on stuff, and we don't want billions of people. Well, commercially we do, but I think if you're a fan, you don't want everyone to be a fan, because you've got to find something else.
I'd love to hear from the floor, and I think we have microphones in the building. I'd like to hear from you, and then Stuart here. Yeah.
Hi there. This is a question to M. Night Shyamalan. Most of your heroes, protagonists, have direct experience with the supernatural realm or mystical experiences. Do you have them? Do you have a sixth sense? Do you remember your past lives? Do you sense sometimes spirits, non-incarnate souls? Anything of that sort? Because if we take it seriously, then the question arises, do you have that?
Yeah, well, I definitely, I use these conversations with this, the supernatural or these kind of subjects as just a way to talk about faith that isn't centered around religion. And I guess I have strong feelings about religion, and that comes out in the fact that I won't talk about it through religion. I want to talk about what do we believe in, characters who have lost their way. I mean, I guess I always feel a certain sense of feeling lost and, in a spiritual way, and wanting to have some meaning, and these things get to be a conduit for me to talk about those fears. And I wish that we were a part of something bigger. I want to believe we're a part of something bigger. That could just be me being, naive and primitive and all those things, but I so desperately want that. That's what you're feeling from me in all these stories. I mean, literally, like I live in this big old house, and the other day I was walking and I thought I heard something, and then I was like, you know, now when a kid you just be scared and run backwards, but now I'm like, please let there be a ghost at the end of the hallway, I know that this isn't all there is to it. And you could be bloody, you could be scary, whatever you want to be. Just please appear so that I know, so that I can go back and be like, it's all good. This isn't the end of it all. We're a part of something bigger.
Stuart.
Hello, thank you. It's been fascinating. This is probably more for Stephen, but for everyone. How do you balance serving fans and responding to their feedback versus surprising them and maybe pushing them in a direction they don't know they want to go yet? How do you balance those two kind of things?
Balance what fans want with what the wider audience wants.
Well, with what fans want versus stuff they don't know they want yet, but they might like.
You don't have any balance there at all. You don't give them what they think they want. That would just be mad. Well, in the end, the only useful index you've got is what you would like. It's really a strange way to write a story, and an arrogant way to write a story, to say, I'm going to give people what they want. How the hell would you know? You don't even know what birthday present to get the person closest to you. How the hell would you know what everybody else wants?
Well,
There's a lot of people who have had unsuccessful birthday presents recently in this audience. That's what I'm getting from that.
You hit a nerve.
That comes back to what we were talking about with Sherlock Holmes, really. You know, if you had any fear of what the Sherlock Holmes societies wanted, or any idea, you wouldn't have done what you did.
I honestly don't think anybody makes a film or a television program or writes a book or anything for any other reason than they think, wouldn't it be brilliant if I got someone to pay me to do this? Yeah. And that's fantastic. That's the victory. The victory isn't it being a huge success. That's terribly nice. What's great is you get to do it for a living. The alternative, and let's be clear about this, is you'd have to have some sort of a job, and those are awful. So it's much more fun to be doing this.
You know, I think you know this collision of art and commerce that we're talking about. And basically, it's the question, and the way you answered it is a tricky one, because you know, let's say for example, someone says, "Hey, this is a big video game. Let's make a movie about this video game." Okay, so that's commerce leading art to make that. That, in my opinion, that's when things start to become soulless, and we're either going to be unsuccessful in a creative way, or unsuccessful in a creative way and a financial way. Now, someone comes and says, "That's my favorite video game. I grew up playing that. I love it. I know it inside and out. This is why I love it. I would like to make a movie about that." That's different. That's art leading commerce, and then the money guys go, "Oh wow, that's sold 30 million.
Absolutely,
Thanks. Let's make a movie." Yeah, that tends to work out better because you're staying closer to the vein of some. And when you started with your shows, and when I was listening to you, you were coming from the inside. I call this with my kids. I said, you know, inside out versus outside in, and you know, be very careful, because you can trick yourself into doing it the other way. You want to be safe. There's an opportunity. It seems, you know. Yeah. And you go, wow, I do like sci-fi, and they offered me that, but really that was outside in what you just did. Yeah. What you just did. That was, you didn't come from, you know, the photos down, and I don't know why, but I have to tell that freaking story. Yeah. That's that way.
On that point, I'm really sorry.
Oh, no.
We have to. I know. It's terrible. We've gone over time, and I can't take any more questions from the floor. Such a fascinating discussion, and I thank you all for staying throughout, and especially thank our panel. It was great fun. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, guys.